Alright, I'm going to try part 2 of the CG Fast Track Blender tutorial. This one's an hour longer than the last one. I actually wasn't expecting that, but baby steps. Let's go. That's all I can say.
3D modeling for 100% absolute beginners. We are going to build out this fantasy sword model in part 1 during our Minecraft project. Now we're going to focus on integrating the viewport tools, specifically the GRNS hotkeys. And step number 2, we'll start with the G, which is our move and grab tool. Once we hit G on the keyboard, you will notice that the cube starts to move around. All we have to do is simply move around the mouse and then click anywhere to drop it back into our scene. Now I've hit what we used during the Minecraft project. For me and the thousands of people I've heard from about this add-on, this makes it drastically easier to use the GRS hotkeys, as they are much more visual.
What add-on? What are we talking about here now?
So how do we simplify the GRNS hotkeys? The way I like to work, and the way most people end up following along with me, is by using the Lazy Viewport add-on. This is an add-on that we made that is free to use. I'll show you how to install this after this example. You'll see what this does is after I enable the Lazy Viewport add-on, my GRNS hotkeys now are working with the viewport tools, the same viewport tools that we used during the Minecraft project. For me and the thousands of people I've heard from about this add-on, this makes it drastically easier to use the GRS hotkeys, as they are much more visual, they are way less technical, and then we don't really have to predict which axis we want to be on with the XYZ hotkeys. So how do you start working with the Lazy Viewport add-on? In step number 6, click the downloads again in the description, and then right next to where we downloaded the Blender hotkey cheat sheet, we have our Lazy Viewport button. Click that and it's going to route you over to GitHub, which is where the add-on is located. And then from there we have a green button at the top right.
Right. This will be interesting. Relearn no files, tab. Choose the tab. Right. So Lazy Viewport add-on.
Right. Click that and then select download zip. Once you have that downloaded, right click and extract the file. Then go back into Blender, go to the edit menu and go all the way down to preferences. In our preferences, we want to select add-ons on the left side of the panel. Then we're going to click install. Then we just navigate to our Lazy Viewport file that we just extracted. We do not want the zip file, we want the .py file. So navigate into that directory file and you'll see the Python file, which is in our add-on, and then select it and then click install. From here, we need to enable it. Simply search the Lazy Viewport using the downloads again in the description. And then right next to where we downloaded the Blender hotkey cheat sheet, we have our Lazy Viewport button. Click that and it's going to route you over to GitHub, which is where the add-on is located. And then from there, we have a green button at the top right. Click that and then select download zip. Once you have that downloaded, right click and extract the file. Then go back into Blender, go to the edit menu and go all the way down to preferences. In our preferences, we want to select add-ons on the left side of the panel. Then we're going to click install. Then we just navigate to our Lazy Viewport file that we just extracted. We do not want the zip file, we want the .py file. So navigate into that directory file.
I need to figure this out. One moment. I hate OneDrive personal. Apparently it's not the documents, I put it into the wrong one. So that's why it's not showing up. Cancel. And I'll go back now, install again. Viewport master. Okay.
And you'll see the Python file, which is in our add-on, and then select it and then click install. From here, we need to enable it. Simply search the Lazy Viewport using the search menu.
Did it automatically?
And click enable. If you're not seeing anything after you use the search results, you may have attempted to install the zip file, so be sure to install the extracted .py file. Now, if you're already used to the built-in XYZ hotkeys, you're not obligated to use the lazy viewport at all. Both methods work just fine. There's no right or wrong way to move things around in Blender. However, if you are new to Blender, and specifically if you are coming from the Minecraft project, I highly advise you to download the lazy viewport and take on full advantage of it. The default XYZ snapping hotkeys tend to be very, very problematic for beginners. And the lazy viewport, on the other hand, makes it a much smoother process. Now, the final step is our practice round. Just like if I were to teach you how to do a push-up, it doesn't magically make you strong. You have to practice at it to get strong. Right-click on your cube, duplicate objects, hit escape to drop it just like we did in Minecraft. Hit G to move it over, then hit R to rotate it, and then hit S to scale it. And then a very special note here for the scale tool, we're only going to use the white handle. The white handle is what we're primarily going to be using throughout the course. I'll repeat that again. Right click, duplicate object, hit escape to drop it, G to move it over, R to rotate it around, and then S to scale it on the white handle. Now you want to do this drill 5 to 10 times. Yes, that sounds tedious, but is much less painful than struggling the rest of the way throughout the course. The key to learning 3D software early on is repetition. Knowing this information doesn't help you if you cannot effectively apply it efficiently. And being able to move with these hotkeys effectively and efficiently along with other tools is crucial for your success moving forward. So get your 5 to 10 practice tries in, and we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal for this chapter is to get to know edit mode by clicking on the object mode drop down menu. So what is the difference between object mode and then edit mode? Object mode is going to be for doing basic things like layout and animation and lighting. Edit mode is where we enter the world of 3D polygon modeling. For example, in this project for the sword, we'll turn a cube into a blade, and then we're going to turn a cylinder into the guard, and then we're going to use another cylinder to create the handle, and then another cylinder to then create the pommel. For step number 1, we want to practice jumping in and out of edit mode and object mode using the tab hotkey. I'll start in object mode, then first we need to define our selection. I'll select one of my cubes, then I'm going to hit the tab hotkey on my keyboard, which will automatically switch us from object mode into edit mode and then back again into object mode.
That's a bit of
I'll hit
muscle
tab to
memory
jump
I
back
kept
out
from
into object
before.
mode, then I'll select another object, I'll hit tab again to then go into edit mode. And then you want to repeat this process over and over at least 5 times. Tab into edit mode, tab out to object mode, and then select another one, tab into edit mode, then tab back out to object mode. Now, a really big Blender trap to fall into is attempting to select other objects while you're in edit mode. Be sure to bring your eyes back to the video for this one. Once you're in edit mode, you're in edit mode for one object. You can only select sections of that object now. And you cannot select any other objects until you jump back out to object mode. Very tricky. And continue practicing. Now, as you jump in and out
That
of
does
object
make
mode
picking
and
just
edit
a
mode,
single
you'll notice that
object
there
with
starts to be a lot
textures,
of
if
stuff
I
that
remember right,
changes inside of Blender.
so it won't
So let's break it
paint
down
anything
exactly
else.
what's changing here and why. For starters, on the left, we have our modeling toolbar, and we're going to be learning a lot about these as we go. Then at the top here, we'll also have our modeling menu, which we'll be diving into more in a bit as well. For now, all we need to know is that our viewport tools and menus are now changing whenever we toggle back and forth between object mode and edit mode. So we can only do things in one mode or the other. In edit mode, the 3 most important items to get to know first is our edit mode selections. At the top left, right next to where it says edit mode, we have 3 different selection modes for vertices, edges, and faces. So what are our vertex, edges, and faces? With any 3D object that we're going to be working with, generally speaking, it's going to be made up of polygons. And a polygon is made up of 4 different verts, 4 different edges, and then 1 polygon face. This is our vertex, edge, and face selection mode. And for step number 2, we're going to use the edit mode selection tools to begin modifying our mesh. After I'm in edit mode on one of my cubes, I'll jump into vert selection mode by hitting number 1 on my keyboard. We can also select these with our mouse, but get some practice in using the hotkeys. And now you'll notice that once we select our move tool, we can select each individual vertex and move it individually. So play around with vertex a bit, and then for step number 3, we're gonna have our edges. So I'll hit the number 2 key on my keyboard to jump into edge mode. We'll select any edges, and then we can start to move those as well. Very, very, very easy. And then for step number 4,
Possibly one of the most important things to learn is the 1, 2, 3.
From here, we can select each individual polygon face and then move
Should
those
you,
as
within a
well.
week,
Very, very
it'll be
easy.
muscle
So go ahead
memory.
and
I
play around
remember
with the
that.
selection for a bit, and we're gonna get
The
to
only
some
thing I remember whenever I loaded up freaking Blender after 5 months of no
Our goal
using
for
it.
these next few chapters is to get to know the most common edit mode tools. And we're going
Alright.
to start building the sword after these couple chapters, so this is your chance to get dirty and make mistakes We're just going to practice a couple tools. And with these edit mode tools, the number one problem I see from beginners, and this was a huge problem I had as well, was not understanding the difference between destructive and non-destructive workflows in 3D. Doing basic move, rotate, and scale operations, this is a non-destructive workflow, meaning no matter how much we distort the original mesh, we can always get back to the original mesh by resetting it to its default values. This is a non-destructive workflow. We can always go back in time. And with destructive workflows, they're the complete opposite. Very similar to cutting a piece of paper with some scissors. Once we cut it, that's it. It's done. We can't magically uncut the piece of paper. This is a destructive workflow. And most of the tools that we use in edit mode are going to be a destructive workflow, which as a beginner can be very problematic, as every action that we do is completely dependent on the action that we do before it, making it a very linear process. So a simple workflow that we can do to help with this is number 1, navigate into position. Number 2, select the mesh. Number 3, select the edit mode tool. Number 4, perform the action. Number 5, undo if necessary. And number 6, repeat all of these steps. And the key process here is that number 5, undo if we need to. Because once we repeat these steps over and over and over, we can very quickly get to a point of no return. And then the undo button, of course, will not save us then. So how do we apply this? Before we get going, let's both reset our scenes so we're both working on the same page. Go to the File menu, go to the New, and then select the General preset to jump into a new scene. Go ahead and hit Don't Save. Now we'll get going. So first, let's try the Extrude tool. So step number 1, I'm going to navigate into position. I'm going to select my default cube. Then I'm going to go up to the View menu, hit Frame Selected, or you can hit the number pad period key to jump into place. And we want to be using Frame Selected a lot as we work. Then I'll orbit around so we can clearly see the top of our mesh. Now, the reason why this step is so important is that because if you're looking at this object from a distance, it's very similar to cutting a piece of paper with a tiny pair of scissors, which is very difficult and very unnecessary. And so step number 2, we're going to select the mesh. I'll jump into edit mode by hitting tab. I'm going to jump into face selection mode by hitting 3. Then I'm going to select the top polygon of our default cube. Great, now that was step number 2, selecting our mesh. Now for step
Control
number 3,
save, by the way, I'll
edit mode tool. In this case,
most people
our
probably know
extrude,
that.
which is the very first modeling operation on the left modeling edit mode toolbar. And then as soon as we select that, we see that we get
Control E.
This new handle is how we move on to step number 4, which is perform the action. Whenever we enable this tool, nothing has happened yet.
Is there.
And so to be able to extrude this, we're just going to click and drag upwards on this handle. Now we can see editing this mesh is like working with a normal sized pair of scissors, because these modeling operations happen in our screen space. The bigger our editing area is, the more control we have. And we're going to practice doing this a couple different times. Extrude once, extrude twice. Now, as you work, what you want to do is continue to navigate into place. And we're primarily going to use Shift and middle mouse button to do these micro navigation movements. Number 2, our selection is already made. Number 3, our edit mode tool is already selected as well, so that we can jump straight to perform the action.
Yeah, I remember when I started that simply remembering how to move by holding the shift or holding your middle mouse in to rotate, it drove me nuts for the first few days. And then I finally got used to it. And again, it's just the same as muscle memory, like 1, 2, 3 for the different selections. You use it that often, but it will drive you nuts.
So I'll click and drag and then navigate into place, click and drag, navigate into place. Continue to do this a few more times to get that practice in. Then we'll do another selection by selecting the side face to extrude that out sideways. I'll select the polygon face, get into position, and then continue to extrude that out. Now, as I work, you'll notice that I'm constantly navigating to position before and after every single action. Every single action that I do, I get closer and closer to my working area so that I'm not working with those tiny scissors and I got more control. Great, and we'll continue with our practice round in the next chapter.
Okay, is that it?
Great, now we'll do this again, and this time we're going to use our inset tool. For step
frick,
number
I
1,
can't
we'll just
remember how to do
navigate
this.
into place. We'll get comfortable in our viewport. Now's a good time to go ahead and go up to your
Oops,
view menu.
okay, it was just
and then
I.
select frame
I do
selected
remember.
again, or hit the period key on your number-pad. Orbit around to get into perspective. And then step number 2, we need to set the selection, which is already done for us at this point. And then step number 3, we need to select the edit mode tool. So I'm going to select my inset tool, which is directly under my extrude tool. Then as soon as we do, we see that we get a new circular shaped handle. Now, before I perform this action, I want you to pay very
Shift
close
space
attention
bar
and bring your eyes
or
back to
I.
the video.
Okay.
Now on this handle, I'm going to click and drag. Now, while I'm still dragging this, while I'm still in drag mode, I have all the control I want to be able to move this wherever I want. But then as soon as I let it go, the operation is then performed. Just like cutting a piece of paper, we want to be very patient and slow with these operations so that we get them just right. And then I'll let go of my mouse to complete that action. And then now we're going to go ahead and practice step number 5, which is undoing this. So I'm going to go up to my edit menu.
Yeah, if
and
you
hit
hold
the undo
shift
button,
too,
and
it
there we go.
slows
Now
it
we can
down. Like there's
redo
without
this.
shift.
But if we were to
Like, what
continue
the hell?
on with this, we
And then
may
with
not be able
shift.
to get back that far. Now we can perform that action again. I'll click and drag on my handle, being very patient as I get it into place, releasing to
Extrude
confirm
in.
that action. Great, now I'm going to switch back to my extrude tool and extrude this inwards. I'll select the
Oh, yeah,
extrude tool,
he's
which
doing
is
that.
directly above the inset tool, once again, and then I'm going to click and drag on that handle to
Or for
extrude
the
that.
game.
And as you can see here, with just these two tools alone, we can start to create
For
some
the
very
game.
complex shapes. And then the next tool we're going to get to know is the merge tool. So first I'll select my select tool, and that will deactivate the extrude tool that we were currently on. So step number 1, I'm going to get into position. I'm going to rotate around it and get on the side of our extrusions. Then step number 2, we need to do our selection. I'm going to jump into vert selection mode by hitting number 1 on my keyboard. And then I'm going to select one of the vertices. And then I'm going to use shift on my keyboard to select the second vertice directly next to it. Now in this case, step number 3, which is select the edit mode tool, and step number 4, which is perform the action, are the same button. So I'm going to go up to my mesh menu, I'm going to go down to merge, and then I'm going to choose merge at center. And then after we hit that button, we should then see that our vertices are now one vertice. So what we're going to get to know is the merge.
Okay, merge, right.
So
Did this
first I'll
before,
select
can't
my
remember.
Select tool, and that will deactivate the extrude tool that we were currently on. So step number 1, I'm going to get into position. I'm going to rotate around it and get on the side of our extrusions. Then step number 2, we need to do our selection. I'm going to jump into vert selection mode by hitting number 1 on my keyboard, and then I'm going to select one of the vertices. And then I'm going to use shift on my keyboard to select the second vertice directly next to it. Now in this case, step number 3, which is select the edit mode tool, and step number 4, which is perform the action, are the same button. So I'm going to go up to my mesh menu, I'm going to go down to merge, and then I'm going to choose merge at center. And then after we hit that button, we should then see that our vertices are now one vertice. This is our merge tool. We don't have much control over it, it just kind of does what it does. Now I'll try the merge tool one more time, but instead of using the menu, we're going to use a hotkey. I'll select the bottom vert here, and then I'm going to use shift on my keyboard to select the second vertice directly next to it. And then we're going to use the hotkey M to jump into our merge menu. And then there we see our menu, merge at center, just like we did before. And the next tool is our loop cut tool. What this does is it adds a new edge that wraps around the existing edges on your surface. Use Control R to activate your loop cut. Hover your mouse over to find an edge center. This step is a bit tricky. As you have your mouse around, you'll notice that this can be a bit hard to find. The preview edge starts to jump around a bit. So bring your mouse back to the very center of an edge to stabilize it. Once you find it, click to enter the loop cut slide. Then immediately hit escape to drop it, which will create a new loop cut directly in the middle of the two edges. There are other ways to use this loop cut tool as well, but for this complete beginner's course, we're going to keep it very simple, and that's the only way we're going to use it throughout the entire course. And we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal right now is to transform a cube into the very tip of the blade using edit mode. And the very first step to do that is to block in a low-res version of the mesh. Then we're going to add details in as we go. For step number 1, we're going to reset the seam. Be sure to do this now. This new file is going to be the one that we're going to carry through the remainder of the course, and we want to start fresh here so that we're both going to be on the same page. And then step number 2, I'm going to set the initial scale values for the tip of the blade. I'm going to start with the default cube. I'll select that. I'll jump into my object properties. Then our scale values to a value of 0.23, 1, and then 0.06.
Where's that? 0.23, oh, and then
Now is going to be our scale X, Y, and Z. Then after you apply those values, what we should start to see now is we have a rectangular shape. And how did I get these values? These are all from when I prepped the lecture. Normally I would eye this up in the viewport, but let's both start here so we're setting ourselves up for our success. Then step number 3, we need to add more resolution to the mesh. I'll hit tab to jump into editor mode. Then you'll notice that everything is selected by default the first time we jump into edit mode. That's what we want. If yours isn't selected, go up to the select menu in the very top, select all. Then continuing in edit mode, I'm going to right click on our top option and hit the subdivide button. Click that, and what you should then see is that we now have more edges to work with, which makes this as a destructive workflow so that we can modify it in edit mode. Then step number 4, we're going to use our merge tool here, so we're setting ourselves up for success. Then and again, we don't want to be working with that tiny pair of scissors. Then afterwards, super quick width, which makes this as a destructive workflow so that isn't selected, go to the select menu in the very top, select all. Then continue in edit mode, I'm going to right click on our top option and hit the subdivide button. Click that, and what you should then see is that we now have more edges to work with. Which
damn it. But it was going to be a modifier.
Makes this as a destructive merge tool. Isn't selected, go up to the select menu in the very top, select all. Then continue in edit mode, I'm going to right click on our top option and hit the subdivide button. Click that, and what you should then see is that we now have more edges to work with, which makes this as a destructive workflow so that we can modify it in edit mode. Then step number 4, we're going to use our merge tool, and we're going to do so with the help of the same modeling workflow we did in our practice rounds. So step number 1, we're going to navigate into place. I'll go up to the view menu, I'll hit frame selected while I have everything selected on my mesh. So super important that we do this now. These next few chapters we're going to be working very closely to the mesh, and we want greater control. And again, we don't want to be working with that tiny pair of scissors. Then afterwards, super close, step number 3, we need to select our mesh. For our working area, I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard to jump into vert selection mode, and then I'm going to box drag select the very tip of the cube. And note here I have 9 verts selected. I'm going to rotate around to confirm that I got them all. And a very special note here, the vertices that we've selected should be on the negative y-axis, which basically means the green handle that does not have the y letter on the 3D axis should be pointing towards us, not away from us. And the reason why is that's just going to help us stay on the same page throughout the course. And then step number 3 and step number 4, select a tool and perform the action. With our merge tool is going to be the same action again. Hit M hotkey to get our merge menu, and then I'm going to choose merge at center. And then what you do, you should start to see that we now have a tip starting to happen. We're starting to get it somewhere. Now we're going to repeat this for the side. I'm going to select 3 different verts this time on the side, making sure I've deselected the original selection. Hit M and then merge at center. Then I'll select the 3 more in the back, hit M, merge at center. Great, and now we have one side done and starting to feel like a blade. I'm going to rotate around to the other side, select 3 verts, M for merge at center, then repeat once more for the back. And a super very special note here, we're not going to merge these verts all the way in the back here, in the back center. We're going to use that for the thickness. Great, and that was our merge tool, blocking in the low poly version of the blade. And this is how we usually start modeling, starting low resolution and then slowly layering details onto the mesh as we work towards the final result. And we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal now is to set up Blender's backup system. As you move forward, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes, and you're going to need to redo sections. This is how we all start as beginners. So step number 1, let's set up our Blender project directory. On your computer, make a directory called CG Fast Track, and we'll throw everything inside of there. Then inside of there, save your sword into a sword.blend file inside of Blender, inside of that directory.
Okay.
Then you'll want to create a downloads folder as well and throw all the downloadable content from this course inside of that directory. This will help you stay a bit more organized. Blender often works with relative paths, meaning later on when we make connection to textures, this becomes much more forgiving, and then we can move our CG Fast Track directory around our hard drive with more flexibility. So how do we get backups going? Step number 2, you want to make sure that your auto save is on. I'll go up to my edit menu, I'll go down to preferences, then down to save and load. And we want to make sure that autosave checkbox is turned on. And what this will do for us is every 2 minutes, it'll automatically save our file. This is most useful is if Blender accidentally crashes on us. Then we recover our autosaves under the file menu, then recover, then we have recover autosave. Very useful. Last session is also useful. This opens the last state of your Blender file whenever you quit out Blender last time. And then step number 3, we need our save versions. All we need to do is set the save versions here to a value of 20. And what this is going to do is automatically make incremental backups of our Blender file. Each and every time we hit our manual save file. Helps us when we make a mistake and say our bevel tool, for example, goes into chaos mode, and you can always get to a backup where that issue wasn't present. And this really works well because with the CG Fast Track format, where we break everything down into bite-sized chapters, course, so worst case scenario, you only have a few minutes to redo rather than a 3-hour course. Now,
Yep.
opening these backup files are a bit tricky, so step number 4, let's practice opening these up. Go ahead and save your file with Save As if you need to, and then hit save a few times, and each time we do that, we'll get a new backup snapshot going. And we can open these up if we go into our File Open menu. But the problem is here, whenever we look at this, we don't actually see them by default. So what's going on here? We need to adjust our file filters, and then we need to turn on .blend files. Now we should start to see that each and every time we save, we can now open these back up in our File Open
What?
button. Very easy backup snapshot going. And we can open these up if we go into our
Right,
File
okay.
Open menu. But the problem is here, whenever we look at this, we don't actually see them by default. So what's going on here? We need to adjust our file filters, and then we need to turn on .blend files. Now we should start to see that each and every time we save, we can now open these back up in our File Open button very easily. All right, and once you have your backup system going, we'll continue in the next chapter.
A lot of new stuff
What we're
even
now
for someone
to
that
take
did
the
2 months
black end
before.
of our blade and add in a center groove using our bevel tool. And for step number 1, what I'm going to do is just rotate the viewport around so I can easily see the base of my blade. That's just going to allow us to make the selection a little bit easier. And then step number 2, we just need to
Edge.
make the selection. So I'm going to hit 2 to go into edge mode on my keyboard. And then I'm going to select the center edge right here. Now what we want to do is select all the way around the back. So I'm going to shift select this back 2 edges right here. And then I'm going to shift select that bottom one right there. So now we have a total of 4 edges selected. And just to note here, I do not have the tip selected, so we do not want to have the tip selected right here. Once we have those 4 edges selected, I'm going to jump into my bevel tool. But before we try this on the blade, bring your eyes back to the video. There's a couple blender traps to check out first, so let's go over the do's and don'ts of the bevel tool. Number 1, being overly aggressive. A little bit goes a very long way. Number 2, being zoomed out. This also makes the tool work more aggressively. Number 3, dragging on the handle in the wrong direction. Makes it unstable. And then number 4, accidentally clicking on the bevel tool twice. You only want to touch this once. And what we do want to do is, number 1, be very gentle. Number 2, drag in the direction of the handle. Regardless if the direction of the handle looks like it's going the wrong way, drag in the direction it's going anyway. Okay, now it's your turn. And after we have our edges selected, and we've selected the bevel tool, and we want to be very gentle with this. And I'm just going to click and drag on that. And I'm roughly going to go about 30% of the way. Yours does not have to be perfect. It does not.
1 second, bevel tool, okay. Control B, okay.
Not to match mine exactly, but somewhere in that ballpark should be good. And then step number 4, we need to add a loop cut directly down the center of the mesh. I'll hit Ctrl+R to enter the loop cut mode. I'm going to hover my mouse over it.
Back a little bit, just looking back
And
around.
number 4, accidentally clicking on the bevel tool twice. You only want to touch this once. And what we do want to do is, number 1,
Almost
be
as like
very
one of
gentle.
them Star
Number
Wars
2,
ships.
drag in the direction of the handle. Regardless if the direction of the handle looks like it's going the wrong way, drag in the direction it's going anyway. Okay, now it's your turn. And after we have our edges selected,
I did it
and we've
twice.
selected the bevel tool, and we want to be very gentle with this. And I'm just going to click and drag on that. And I'm roughly going to go about 30% of the way. Yours does not have to be perfect. It doesn't have to match mine exactly, but somewhere in that ballpark should be good. And then step number 4, we need to add a loop cut directly down the center of the mesh. I'll hit Ctrl+R to enter the loop cut mode. I'm going to hover my mouse over to find the center of the edge. And then once I find it, I'm going to click once. But now instead of dragging and dropping it, what I'm going to do is hit the escape key on my keyboard. And what this is going to do is drop it perfectly into place at the center of the mesh. So escape mid-loop cut drops it at the center.
On the
There we
bottom
go.
too.
And then for step number 5, I'll scale this inward. I'll hit S to jump into my scale tool. And then super special note here, we're only going to be scaling on the blue handle downward. And then after we have that scaled inwards, we'll see that we now have our groove blocked in. At this point, it's a good idea just to rotate around, look at the top, look at the bottom, make sure that everything's looking good. And then after that, we'll go ahead and start adding some more details in the next chapter.
Don't
At
know
this
about
point,
that.
we
Why
know
is that not?
Something feels off. Something is missing. So our goal
Yeah.
now is to add in a slight roundness to the edge to add a bit of realism into our blade.
Subverge.
We're going to do this with the help of our subdivision surface modifier, or sub
Yes, that one.
workflow. And step number 1 is to add in our subdivision surface modifier. We'll go to our modifier panel, the wrench icon. We'll go up to add modifier, And then in the second column, all the way to the bottom, the fifth one from the bottom, we're going to choose subdivision surface. And then once you click that, what you'll see that is now we get our cage mesh. We have our cage mesh, and we have our final subdivided mesh. So now we are officially in sub-D modeling mode. And then step number 2, we'll set our sub-D settings. The first one is levels and viewport. We're going to want to change that to V2. And what that's going to do is just guarantee us that our viewport, which is what we're looking at right now, is going to be the same as our render. We'll talk more about rendering in a bit. And that's basically just so we don't get any unpredictable results later on. And the second setting we want to get to know is our modifier display settings over here. And by default, we can see the modifier in edit mode, object mode, and rendered mode. We are going to turn off visibility in edit mode.
My opinion on this is kind of like it's a virtual modifier. It's showing you what it would look like if you added, you know, more edges, more vertices and faces to it, but it hasn't actually applied it yet. Because whenever you do apply it, I'm pretty sure it does actually show that. So I'll actually save this now and then another render mode. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure I'll do that later, but I'll double check that later.
Disable that and it'll turn gray, and then we can no longer see it in our viewport while we're in edit mode. And if we want to see the final mesh, we can tab out back into object mode, so we can tab back and forth to see our cage mesh, to see our final subdivided mesh. Why are we doing this? This is going to allow us to be able to see it a little bit easier. After you get used to sub-D modeling, you can go ahead and turn that back on and play around with that. Now we have one more problem that we're seeing here, and that is the surface of it feels rough. It doesn't really feel smooth yet. So in step number 3, we're going to fix that with our shade smooth setting. So to do that, we need to be in object mode. This does not work in edit mode. So once you're in object mode, we'll right click on the object, and then we'll go to shade smooth, which is all the way at the top. Shade smooth, and then we'll see all of a sudden we got a very smooth surface going. Now obviously this isn't looking good at this point. This isn't what we want. It's a little too round at this point, so we'll go ahead and start fixing that in the next chapter.
Okay.
Our goal now is to fix the cage mesh so that our subdivision modifier can function correctly. For step number 1, we need to delete the entire back faces. While I'm in object mode, I'm going to select my blade and hit tab to jump into edit mode. I'm going to hit 3 to jump into face selection mode, and now we need to select the back faces. I'll jump into my select tool. I'll select one of the back faces, and then I will shift click the remaining of the back faces. Great, and then once we have all them selected, we can then perform our delete. So I'll hit X on my keyboard to jump into the delete menu, then we'll choose delete faces. Then once we have that, you'll notice that if you jump back out into object mode, you'll notice that the back edge is now fixed. We have our cage mesh fixed for that area, but the rest of it is still too smooth. So how do we fix that? For step number 2, we need to add some resolution to our mesh. I'll jump back into edit mode by hitting tab. And currently we are too low poly. This isn't enough polygons for a subdivision modifier to work correctly. I'll go to my select menu. I'll do select all, very top option. And then after we have the entire mesh selected, I'm going to right click and then choose subdivide, the very top option. Just like we did it when we blocked in the blade. Once you have that, if you start to tab in and out of object mode and edit mode, you'll start to see the mesh is now holding its shape a lot more. This is what we're after, but it's still not enough. It still feels...
Oh, there's actually what I was talking about. This is actually adding the subdivide and applying it. This one here is just showing you it, but it hasn't applied yet. So when we do it, you will see the extra pieces.
Too round. So how do we solve this? There are a few different ways we're going to get into in this course to be able to do this, such as edge creases, and there's also holding edges, which is adding more loop cuts, but we're going to keep things super basic for this example. For step number 3, we have a basic solution for this problem, which is our simple smoothing in our subdivision modifier. I'll go back to my subdivision modifier. I'll change the option from Catmull Clark over to simple. So what is all this doing? Very similar to when we right click and subdivided our mesh in edit mode. This simply adds more resolution to our mesh without adding a smoothing operation. Now the question you might be asking is, why wouldn't we just do another subdivision in our edit mode? This is because our subdivision modifier is non-destructive, which means we can always just adjust this later on as we continue and extend.
That's what it's saying. It hasn't applied it yet. It's giving you like a preview of what would happen if you applied it. But if you're not happy with it, you can always undo it. So modifiers are amazing.
We're going to choose subdivision surface modifier again. I'm going to add that. And then for my values I'm going to sit here, I'm going to disable visibility in edit mode. Then I'm going to turn the levels in both the viewport and rendered mode to 1 and 1. And then I'm going to leave the Camel-Clark setting on, which of course is just a fancy word for smoothing the object. Now if I tab back out into object mode, we should now see that our blade is starting to feel a lot more hard surface. This is starting to feel like what we want. Okay, so that's a wrap for this chapter, but a few bonus tips here. We can control how sharp this is by controlling the first subdivision modifier. I'm going to leave off with a value of 2, but if I lower this to a value of 1, you'll notice that the tip becomes rounder. And if I raise this up to 3, it gets sharper. It's because we have more resolution for our subdivision modifier to work. Now, for rendering purposes, I'm going to leave off with a value of 2. This is so that later on in the course, the light will catch the edge a little bit better. And although that's not as realistic, it's going to feel a lot more realistic in the end. And we'll continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to extend the blade to its full length. For step number 1, we need to make our selection, which is the back edges of our blade. In object mode, I'll select my blade. I'll hit tab to jump into edit mode again. Then I'll hit 2 on my keyboard to jump into edge selection mode. First, I'm going to show you what not to do, so bring your eyes back to the video for this one.
Adds
In
around
Blender,
its
if you
length
try
in
to
that loop.
perform a selection from the wrong angle, you might accidentally miss a selection. Blender's 3D viewport by default only selects what is visible. It doesn't
A
select
ring on that
through an
connected to
object.
that, hold an Alt,
Now it's your
a
turn.
ring
So
connected to
rotate
this,
the 3D
hold an
view
Alt.
around to get into position, and then box drag select the entire back edge of the blade, and then rotate around and just make sure you have everything selected. And then for step number 2, we need
Probably
to
where
do
they should
extrusion.
say
I'm
that
gonna
about
select
the
my
Alt click.
extrusion tool. Now we have another Blender gotcha here, so bring your eyes back again to the video. If I quickly make an extrusion, you'll notice that I get this magic little pop-up panel at the bottom left of my 3D view. This is our last action operator panel. This is historically problematic because if you click anywhere or activate any tool immediately after doing this, the menu disappears, it goes away, and it's hard to get back. The last action operator panel is only displayed in your last action. And if you click anything or activate another tool, that is
Another
technically
action.
another action in Blender. So I'll undo my extrusion and now it's your turn. I'll click and drag to perform the extrusion. Now before clicking anywhere, you want to go down and find your last action operator panel. Then click to expand it. And if you accidentally don't get this, just go ahead and undo out of that extrusion and do it again.
Why?
And here we can perform some additional settings to the last action that we just did. In this case, I'll set the move to 4.8 in the Z axis. Then the default value of 0 in both X and Y. Now, where did I get the value of 4.8? Those again are all from when I prepped the lecture. This will make a little bit more sense in a couple chapters. Then there we go. We should now see that we have the full length of the blade. And if I tab back out in object mode, the subdivision settings that are all non.
Okay, that doesn't seem right.
And do it again. And here we can perform some additional settings to the last action that we just did. In this case, I'll set the
Then again,
move
that is kind of
to
interesting. It
4.8
bends it
in
for
the
you.
Z axis. Then the default value of 0 in both X and Y. Now, where did I get the value of 4.8? Those again are all from when I prepped.
Nah, I would really like to know what I'm supposed to be doing here, but extrude along the y-axis. Okay. So why is he doing it along the z-axis?
Prep the lecture. This will make a little bit more sense in a couple chapters. Then there we go. We should now see that we have the full length of the blade. And if I tab back out in object mode, the subdivision settings that are all non-destructive are automatically applied of the blade, and then rotate around and just make sure you have everything selected. And then for step number 2, we need to do our extrusion. I'm going to select my extrusion tool. Now we have another Blender gotcha here, so bring your eyes back again to the video. If I quickly make an extrusion, you'll notice that I get this magic little pop-up panel at the bottom left of my 3D view. This is our last action.
He is going along the y-axis as well, so why the hell is it z-axis?
If you click anywhere or activate any tool immediately after doing this, the menu disappears, it goes away, and it's hard to get back. The last action operator panel is only displayed in your last action. And if you click anything or activate another tool, that is technically another action in Blender. So I'll undo my extrusion and now it's your turn. I'll click and drag to perform the extrusion. Now before clicking anywhere, you want to go down and find your last action operator panel. Then click to expand it. And if you accidentally don't get this, just go ahead and undo out of that extrusion and do it again. And here we can perform some additional settings to the last action that we just did. In this case, I'll set the move to 4.8 in the Z axis. Then the default value of 0 in both X and Y. Now, where did I get the value of 4.8? Those again are all from when I prepped the lecture. This will make a little bit more sense in a couple chapters. Then there we go. We should now see that we have the full length of the blade. And if I tab back out in object mode, the subdivision settings that are all non-destructive are automatically applied to that new part of the mesh. And
Let me see the comments. Well, I have no idea what I did. Nobody else seems to be doing it. But yeah, back to it.
We're all set, and we'll continue the next chapter. The goal now is to add a slight taper effect to the blade. So it's going to be wider at the base and then slimmer at the tip. For step number 1, we need to add a simple deformer modifier. While I'm still in object mode, I'm going to go to my modifiers panel, select add modifier, and then in the third column, about halfway down, we have the simple deformer modifier. And then after that, you should start to see something starting to happen to the mesh. So what's going on? In step number 2, we need to apply our settings. First, I'm going to collapse the first 2 subdivision modifiers to make a bit more space to work. Then we have our third simple deformer modifier that's going to be expanded. First, I'm going to disable visibility in edit mode on the simple deformer modifier so that we can easily see the cage mesh if we go back to edit mode. Then I'm going to select the taper operation, and then I'm going to select the y-axis. We need the y-axis because if we see the top left of the 3D view, this is the direction that the blade is going. So that's the direction that we want our deformer to go. Now to test this out, if we click and drag on the
Yeah,
factor setting,
I mean, just before that, we moved along the z-axis for some reason. But now it's all of a sudden in the y-axis again.
left and right, we can
Whatever.
start to see that the taper effect is starting to be expanded and contracted depending on the values that we set here. I'm going to manually set this to a value of 0.35 in the factor. That's just going to give a very, very, very slight tapering effect. And a special updated note from our frequently asked questions. If your taper effect is getting smaller at the base, this happens because technically your blade is rotated in a different direction as mine. So if you're having this issue, rotate the blade 180 degrees, then hit apply rotation. This should fix the
So that's the problem with the axis, is it? We'll find out now.
questions. If your taper effect is getting smaller at the base, this happens because technically your blade is rotated in a different direction as mine. So if you're having this issue, rotate the blade 180 degrees, then hit apply rotation. This should fix the taper direction issue. But special note here, you only want to do this if the taper direction is going the wrong way. Now,
Okay, so yeah, that's going the right way. So what was the taper direction again?
back to the video. Now technically this is
0.30. Burning any
making our
difference?
blade bigger overall, which is not what we want. We wanted the tip to taper in, not the base to be expanded out. So we can compensate for this with the scaling operation. And so step number 3, we need to adjust the scale of our object. I'm going to go back to my object properties panel, making sure my blade is still selected. Then in scale X, I'm going to scale this down to a value of 0.18. And by scaling this down, overall the blade is still going to be the same width, it's just getting a little bit smaller towards the tip. And that was tapering the blade, and we'll continue in the next chapter.
Right, okay.
Our goal right now is to block in the rest of the mesh objects using the primitive shapes, and then in the future chapters we'll begin modeling and shaping them out. For step number 1, I'm going to create our cylinder primitive shape. First we'll go to our object mode, and then we'll go over to our add menu, and then we'll find the sub menu, which is mesh. A quick tip here, the add menu is technically available in both object and edit mode, but since we're creating an entirely new object, we want to make sure that we're in object mode and not edit mode before creating these new objects. In our mesh submenu, we'll find a lot of different primitive shapes that we can start to work with. These are generally speaking how we're going to start our modeling process with one of these primitive shapes. Then we'll go down to cylinder. This is what we'll be using for the remaining shapes. For step number 2, immediately after clicking the cylinder, before doing anything else, we want to go to our last action operator panel. This is going to be labeled add cylinder. If you do not see this panel, it's most likely because you perform some action, you click something, and it disappeared. This is a
Already
very
popped up.
common thing to happen. So if you need to get this back, you can always use the hotkey F9, or you can just delete the cylinder and create it again. Just know that you don't want to click anything if you want to access this menu after you perform an action. We can expand the operator panel by clicking on it, and there we'll see all the default values that create our cylinder. We want to change the vertices to a value of 10. So why are we changing this to a value of 10? This is going to make our cylinder a bit more low polygon. Generally speaking, while we're modeling, we want to start low poly and then add details onto it, which would then will become our
Which is
higher
just,
resolution.
you know, add a subdivider on
And then our
it there,
final
it would
step in
instantly
here, we wanna
become
change
20.
the cap fill type to none.
And
This will
subdivided
give
2
us an
becomes
empty
30.
space at the top of our cylinder, which we're
Cap
not going
on.
to use later on down the road, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that now. Now we need to move the cylinder into position for the guard. I'll go back over to my object properties, and then under location Y values, we're going to use the value of 5.82, and then we're going to rotate it 90 degrees in the X value. And a special note here, if your blade is not going in the right direction, the solution for that is to rotate the sword 180 degrees.
Damn it, doing the rotation thing again.
Rotate it 90 degrees.
Something went wrong with mine, but it's going in the right
X
direction.
value. And a special note here, if your blade is not going in the right direction, the solution for that is to rotate the sword 180 degrees in the Z axis. And then I'll set the scale X to 0.275, the scale Y to 0.13, and then scale Z to 0.1. So where am I going to...
Yeah, basically what he's doing here is he's already messed with the sizes, you know, like made it with the scale, and then for the course he's wrote it all down. Whereas if you were doing it yourself in your own one, you would just hit S, scale it so it looks like it fits in right.
These values, again, this is all from when I prepped the lecture. Usually I would just eye this up in the viewport, but to help us stay on the same page, let's manually set these numbers so that
Yeah,
all
so
the
basically what
parameters
he'd be doing
will
is he'd just be
see down
doing
the road.
scale,
Now, before we move on,
get it
this
to
is a
fit
very good
into
time
the
for
right
us to
size of the
frame
blade, but
selected since we have our
we don't
guard
have to
in
do
place.
that
So
because he's
that'll
did
bring
it for
super
us.
close and be ready to work. And then this object will eventually become our guard. And then for step number 3, we're going to duplicate the cylinder a couple different times and then set the value for the handle, the pommel base, and the pommel tip. I'm going to right click duplicate objects, hit escape to drop it, and then while my duplicate is still selected, I can easily set my values then. I'll set my location Y value to 6.54, and then my scale values to 0.12, 0.12, and 0.62.
Okay, I'll pause it here to get this done right.
So you can think of this or the outliner. You can basically scroll on any Blender menu. So what is our viewport shading menu? By default,
Oh
and then
no.
under location Y. And now the one selected will become our higher resolution.
Oh no, it's a miss.
Generally X to 0.275, the scale Y to 0.27. Right click duplicate objects, hit escape to drop it, and then while my duplicate is still selected, I can easily set my values then. I'll set my location Y value to 6.54, and then my scale values to 0.12, 0.12, and 0.62. And then we just repeat this process over and over. So bonus tip here, if you want to be able to jump through these settings quickly, while you have your parameter selected, you can easily jump to the next parameter by hitting your tab key on your hotkey. And if I'm moving too fast for you here, I'll have all the scale values on my screen at the end of the chapter for you to easily check them. Next, we're going to need the base of the pommel. So I'll right click and duplicate objects one more time. Then while my duplicate is still selected, I'm going to set my location Y value to 7.3, and then my scale values to 0.095, and then 0.095 once more, and then 0.15 for the last go.
Make sure I'm clicking this now. So 0.095. 0.095, that's what I did before. What the hell? Point. Five. Is that right?
And then that's going to end up being the base of our pommel. And then now we need one more, and that's going to be the pommel tip. So I'll right click duplicate object, set my location Y to 7.58, and then
So one more time, click that. 7.58.
scale values to 0.13, 0.13, and 0.13. And then in one curveball setting, our rotation X on the last one, we're going to set to a value of 0, because that's going to be pointing straight up. And that was a lot to digest here, so I'm going to then display all my values for every single object on my screen.
Okay, pommel base. 2. Do, do, do. And that's where it was. It was missing that. Just to make sure my guard's done right. Guard's done right. Seems good. See if it's gonna.
And you want to have all these to close as perfect as possible, as this is going to be setting us up for the remainder of the course. And then we'll continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to bring in our reference image, and we're going to use the quad view to help model out the guard. Step number 1, be sure to grab the downloads links down below the video, then put those inside of your project directory that we set up earlier. Then step number 2, we're going to bring in the reference image.
Download files. Show folder. Extract all. Frick off. OneDrive personal. Sword. Downloads. Done. I think it's done. We'll find out now.
Go up to my file menu, then we'll go down to append. This append button is how we import other Blender files into our current Blender file. After we hit append, we should then see project directory, and then we want to navigate to our downloads directory. And then make sure you have everything extracted. Blender doesn't work with zip files. And then we're going to jump into our sword reference .blend file. Once I dive inside that, we are now actually technically inside of that Blender file. We can grab specific objects. I'll navigate to collections. We'll talk more about collections in a bit. And then we'll see our sword reference. That's what we want. I'll select that, and then I'm going to hit append. So what's happening here? We don't see anything different just yet, and that's going to bring us to step number 3, which is setting up our quad view. I'll go up to the view menu, and then the last option at the very bottom, area submenu, which then will choose toggle quad view. Then what we should then see after we hit that button is that Blender now has 4 different views inside of the 3D view. Now this can all be very intimidating at first, so let's break this down. The bottom 2 views we're going to completely ignore. We're not going to be using them for this example. In our top right, we have our 3D view, the same view that we have been working with. Then our top left view, we have our top orthographic view. So we're looking at the objects from top down in this perspective. And orthographic is just a fancy word that we use for viewing things without 3-dimensional perspective. In that top orthographic view, we can navigate around using our navigation tools.
I'm probably going to use this a lot now, I know about it.
Click and drag around just like the normal 3D view to pan around. And then we can also zoom in and out using the middle mouse scroll, just like we did in our 3D view. The only difference here now is that we can actually orbit in the top orthographic view because this is only 2-dimensional. We cannot orbit around. Okay, but as we navigate around, we can still see that the reference image, it's still hard to see. This brings us to step number 4, which is setting up our wireframe mode. At the top right of my 3D view, our 3D view menu, same place where our object and edit mode is, we want to go all the way to the right until we find our viewport shading options. And a quick bonus tip here, if you do not see this menu, you may need to middle mouse scroll back and forth while your mouse is hovering over it. And this technique that I'm using is compatible with any area in Blender. So if you need to scroll in the top tabs and then middle mouse scroll in the properties panels or the outliner, you can basically scroll on any Blender menu. So what is our viewport shading menu? By default, we are on the solid view. That's what we currently have, and that's what we currently see. And on the left, we have our wireframe mode. We're going to turn on the wireframe mode. We'll talk about what the other 2 options are later in the course. Now, after turning on wireframe mode, we now see that we can see through the object. This is our wireframe mode. So you can think of this as tracing through a piece of paper. Very simple. And another bonus tip here, on your future projects, if you want to bring in your own reference, you can do so with the add menu, then the image submenu, and then click on reference. Note that we're not going to do this now because ours is already set up for us. Why did I already set this one up for us? Just to make it a little bit simpler so that we're guaranteed to both be working with the same values as we move forward with the project. And that was our wireframe shading mode, and we'll go ahead and continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to extrude out the guard using our extrusion tool. And in this chapter, we're going to start with blocking in the extrusions first. Reminder to do a manual save starting with this chapter, just in case we need to open up a backup. This is where we're starting to get to. You might want to redo a couple chapters here and there. Now, for step number 1, we're going to navigate into place first I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to make sure that I'm in object mode, and I'm going to select my little tiny guard cylinder right above my blade. And then we're going to snap to this. I'm going to go up to my view menu, and then we're going to go down to frame selected, but this time we're going to choose the frame selected with our quad view, which will snap all of our quad views into place. Now is the perfect time to be doing the frame selected because we're going to be working with the guard for the next several chapters. Then before we do anything else, in our top orthographic view, we just want to zoom out a little bit so that we can see just the left side of the guard. We don't need to see the right one. We're going to end up mirroring this to the other side in a couple chapters. Then step number 2, we're going to make our selection. I'll hit tab to go into edit mode while my guard is selected. Then I'm going to hit 3 to jump into my face selection mode. Then I'm going to orbit around and select the side face. A special note here, while we're in wireframe, it's a bit hard to see the faces, but we have these little tiny dots here in the middle of each polygon. We want to select that, and then we'll get the highlighted face for the side. Then step number 3, we're going to do our horizontal extrusions. Now, this is the distance we want to go. One extrusion to match the first vertical edge, then another extrusion to match the second edge. Whenever we're extruding horizontally, we want to match the vertical edges. Whenever we're extruding vertically, we want to match the horizontal edges. I'm going to select my extrusion tool, and then I'm going to extrude out. Now, after I get into position, immediately after, I'm going to hit the G hotkey to jump into my move tool, then tweak from here. A common habit that we all have when we first start is that we want to keep tweaking, but then use the extrusion tool to tweak, which will of course create more extrusions. So we want to get in the habit, extrude out, hit the move tool, and then tweak from there. And I'm only using the horizontal move tool, the red axis here. Then I'll jump back into my extrusion tool to do the second one. I'll extrude out, and then immediately jump into G to do the final tweaks, and then tweak it on the red axis. And then that was our horizontal extrusion. So now we have step number 4, which is to do our vertical extrusions. I'll start by selecting my extrusion's bottom face with face selection mode on. And now I'm going to be lining up the first one to the left edge and then the second one to the right edge. This one is a little tricky. I'll grab my extrude tool again, extrude down to match the first one on the left, hit G to do any tweaks, only move it on the green axis to do the vertical movement, and then do my extrude tool again, extrude out to match the bottom one, hit G to do any tweaks, and there we go. And once we have the vertical extrusions...
This actually feels a wee bit strange. I know I really shouldn't be doing this, but if I was to do yes from here, I could grab it, move along this axis, grab along here, and then you could do the size on the axis. Not that one. Yeah, that one. You see there? That's basically copying it exactly. But for simplicity, I suppose we're doing it our way. And then if I was here, I would probably just go in, extrude again, and come right here. And then, you know, size, make it smaller again. Grab again, move down here. And you can do the extrude this now. Oh, wrong way. Do it this way, do it that way. I mean, you could do it that way. But I'm going to go back and copy the video because, yeah, I don't want to get lost. Go back at here. And was it this way? Yeah, it was that way. Do it down here. Again.
So now, step number 5, we're going to do our final extrusion. There's just one extrusion left. I'm going to select the side face on my new extrusion, extrude that out all the way, hit G to tweak if needed, and there we go. That's going to be our block in for our extrusion. Now, of course, this is looking super blocky, so we'll continue matching the reference in the next chapter.
So you go past there.
The goal now is to move our verts into position matching the reference. I'll start by hitting 1 on my keyboard to jump into vert selection mode. Now for this chapter, I want you to keep your eyes on the video and watch this technique I'm going to use. The steps and context of the buttons and software is fairly straightforward, but it's the technique that's going to make this simpler. And so first I'll show you what not to do. What not to do, number 1, is select individual vertices just with a single click. If you do that, you'll immediately notice that as you move that you start to get a triangular shape in your wireframe mode. This means that we did not select the backside. So each and every time we select here, we always want to be doing box track selection. That is how we avoid this issue. The
It
second
like
one
selects
to
the
do is
ones
moving
hidden
things
behind it
one
too.
section at a time. This is going to lead to a lot of dents in your mesh, and this is a hard surface mesh, so we want to be as precise in the way we move things around as possible. We're going to undo out of all of that. Now here's the technique that we want to be doing, and remember to keep your eyes on the video for this one. I'm going to select each row vertically first. Then I'm going to move the entire row vertically into place. Then after that I get the top vert into place, I'll then deselect and then select the bottom 3. So I'm going to be working with the whole row at first and then working my way down. Then I'll match up the second one, then I'll deselect, then I'll repeat them for the 2, lining up in this case on the bottom one. And then I take that exact concept and bring it to the next row. So I'll select the entire row, match the top edge, and super special note here again, this is our cage mesh. So you'll notice here that my mesh is actually slightly bigger than what our reference is here. So that when we apply our subdivision later, it'll collapse and hold its shape a little bit better. I'll deselect those, select 3 more, move that up. Now I'm going to be matching the horizontal edge to the right. I'll deselect that again, select 2 of them, then move it up, matching the edge again. Then select the bottom one, continuing to use box drag selection as I move it up.
Yeah, I
Then
think
we have the last
we
2
look
on
better
the end,
personally.
so I'll select them, line them up, and then select the bottom, and then just move it up vertically. So I'm going to be focusing on moving things one directional.
Yeah, I think I would prefer to do it the other way. But you know, video, what's in? Box select. You always want to try and make them like as straight as you can, although it doesn't really matter too much, but yeah, if you can, try to make it straight. Kind of straight. I think. Yeah, we'll go too much into it. And then what do we got? This one there. Down here. Across a wee bit. Wee bit.
As much as possible. And then just a general note, after you have everything blocked in, these 2 areas are going to be the most problematic. These are going to be your toughest ones to do. That is because these 3 verts on each side need to be perfectly sharp. But I've built these things 10 plus times now, so I'm going to be making it look easy for you. You might get halfway through and want to start this thing completely over, and that's totally fine. And a reminder here, if you ever need to get your backups, go to the File, Open menu, go to your filters, select backup things around as possible. I'm going to undo out of all of that. Now here's the technique that we want to be doing. And remember to keep your eyes on the video for this one. I'm going to select each row vertically first. Then I'm going to move the entire row vertically into place. Then after that I get the top vert into place, I'll then deselect and then select the bottom 3. So I'm going to be working with the whole row at first and then working my way down. Then I'll match up the second
Why the hell
one,
is this
then I'll
a square?
deselect, then I'll repeat them for the 2, lining up in this case on the bottom one. And then I take that exact concept and bring it to the next row. So I'll select the entire row, match the top edge, and super special note here again, this is our cage mesh. So you'll notice here that my mesh is actually slightly bigger than what our reference is here. So that when we apply our subdivision later, it'll collapse and hold its shape a little bit better. I'll deselect those, select 3 more, move that up. Now I'm going to be matching the horizontal edge to the right. I'll deselect that again, select 2 of them, then move it up, matching the edge again. Then select the bottom one, continuing to use box drag selection as I move it up. Then we have the last 2 on the end, so I'll select them, line them up, and then select the bottom, and then just move it up vertically. So I'm going to be focusing on moving things one directional as much as possible. And then just a general note, after you have everything blocked in, these 2 areas are going to be the most problematic. These are going to be your toughest ones to do. That is because these 3 verts on each side need to be perfectly sharp. But I've built these things 10 plus times now, so I'm going to be making it look easy for you. You might get halfway through and want to start this thing completely over, and that's totally fine. And a reminder here, if you ever need to get your backups, go to the File, Open menu, go to your filters, select backup.blend, and then you can get your backup there. And then you can just sort by date, go back a few minutes ago, and then try again, no big deal. And that's that, and then we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal for this chapter is to taper the side of the guard. Right now you can see it feels very blocky and square, and we're going to taper it in and make it a bit sharper. And we're going to do so with the help of proportional editing. A normal edit looks like this. We only move what we currently have selected. But with proportional editing, it acts as if the mesh is rubber and sticky, and it'll move everything around you're currently.
Okay, this is interesting. For some reason I can't move anything anymore. Okay, that would be why. Close enough.
Vertices. For step number 1, we want to get out of quad view. We will not be using this for quite some time, and we want our edit mode tools, as we use them, to have as much screen space as possible. And then we're done with wireframe mode as well, so I'll switch back to my solid view, and we're ready to get working. Then for step number 2, we're going to apply a proportional editing. I'll navigate around to find the tip of the mesh. Then I'm going to hit 3 on my keyboard to jump into face selection mode, and then I'll select the very tip of the guard. Once we have that selected, we can then activate proportional editing, which is the circular shaped icon at the top of the center of our viewport. Once we have that activated, you'll notice nothing really changes at first, but from here what we're going to do is hit S on the keyboard to jump into the scale tool, and then scale down on the blue axis. And now you will see that a lot more of the guard is now going to start to be affected by this. The closer it is, the more it's getting affected, and the further away the vertices are, the less it gets affected. And that's it. We just bring it down just a little bit, and then we're good to go. And that's it for this chapter. And as a bonus, if we want to go into our last operator panel, we can adjust how much is being affected. If we click and drag on the proportional size, we are now affecting more or less mesh based on the distance that we set. So the higher the value, the more it's going to affect further away vertices. S on the keyboard to jump into the scale tool, and then scale down on the blue axis. And now you will see that a lot more of the guard is now going to start to be affected by this. The closer it is, the more it's getting affected, and the further away the vertices are, the less it gets affected. And that's it. We just bring it down just a little bit, and then we're good to go. And that's it for this chapter. And as a bonus, if we want to go into our last operator panel, we can adjust how much is being affected. If we click and drag on the proportional size, we are now affecting more or less mesh based on the distance that we set. So the higher the value, the more it's going to affect further away vertices. The default value is a value of 1, which is perfectly fine for this example. And there we go. We'll continue in the next chapter. The goal for this chapter is to mirror the left side of the guard over to the right side, and we're going to do this with the help of the mirror modifier. For step number 1, we're going to make sure to turn off proportional editing. Accidentally forgetting to turn this off is a very, very common mistake that we all do, and I saw this a lot in the original release. So be sure to keep an eye on that. We'll turn that off for now. Step number 2 is to delete the second half of the guard. I'll get into position so that we can work a little easier. I hit 3 on the keyboard to jump into face selection mode, and then I'm going to box drag select all 5 of the polygons on the right side of the guard. So we should only have 5.
Edit mode. Hold on, edit mode. Box select Yep, sounds right.
Selected total. Then I'll orbit around to make sure that we have them selected. I'll hit X, and then we're going to select delete faces. Once you do that, we should then have only half the guard, and we're ready for the mirror modifier. For step number 3, we'll add the mirror modifier. First, I'll go down to my blue wrench icon, and then we'll go to add modifier. And then in the second column, towards the middle, we'll find our mirror modifier. And then once you see that, we should now see that we have the second half of the guard done automatically. And the great thing about this is the modifier system is non-destructive, right? So any edits that we do to the left side from here on out will automatically be applied to the right side. Pretty awesome. A few bonus tips. Generally speaking, the mirror modifier is fairly straightforward. A few tips: it'll mirror based off the wherever the origin is, which is this orange dot in the center of our object. And then the only attributes in this that I usually tweak are going to be the axis attributes. By default, this value should work for us, but sometimes I find myself changing it from X to Y to Z depending on the original layout of my model. We'll leave everything the default values, and we have 2 chapters left with the guard. The problem we're trying to solve in this chapter is with this big empty space in the middle of our guard, and we're going to solve it with the help of our bridge edge loop tool. For step number 1, we're going to jump into local view by going up to the view menu and then down to local view, and then we're going to do toggle local view. And what this is going to do is allow us to isolate one object at a time, and that's basically just going to give us a little bit more space for us to work. And then we can always get out of local view by going back up to that same button. And then step number 2, we need to fill in the center of the guard, and we're going to do that with the help of the bridge edge loops tool. I'll jump into edge selection mode by hitting 2, and then I'm going to shift select the bottom 2 edges. Then in that same order, I'll select the top 2 edges. Note that we need to select these in order, so whatever edges you selected first on the bottom, we also need to select that edge first at the top, giving us a total of 4 selected edges. Then
Okay, so edge 1, 2, D. Did I get the right one? No, I got the wrong one. So 1, 2. Why is that? Yeah, well, you gotta make sure you're doing the right one.
I'll go up to the edge menu, and then I'll select bridge edge loops. That's going to be the 3rd button from the top. And what this is going to do is connect the 2 rows, filling in the polygon faces needed for our holding edges, which is coming up in the next chapter. Great. And then step number 3, we simply just repeat this process for the other side. I'm going to orbit around and get into position. And then we'll deselect by clicking anywhere.
I'll click all, shift select that, unselect that,
and in the same order, I'll shift select the bottom 2 edges. Then I'll go up to our edge menu again, then bridge edge loops, and then that's going to be the 3rd button from the top. Great, and then once we have that, we're all ready to go. I'll do a quick orbit around to make sure that's all looking good, and we'll go ahead and finish the guard in the next chapter.
Yeah, if I take a break out of the guard.
To take our base guard mesh and smooth it using our subdivision modifier, and we're going to do so with the help of our edge creases tool. And what edge creases do is allow us to control the smoothing operation that happens within our subdivision modifier. For step number 1, we'll add our subdivision modifier. I'll make sure that I'm in object mode by hitting tab. I'll make sure my guard is selected, and then in the modifiers panel, I'll add modifier. Then the 2nd column, 5th one to the bottom, we'll select subdivision surface. And we'll set the similar default values that we've been working with. We're going to disable visibility in edit mode. Then we're going to set the levels of the viewport and the render to a value of 3. Usually I don't go much higher than 2 with our subdivisions, but since our mesh is very low res, we're going to start with the value of 3 here. Then we'll notice the guard looks rough, so we'll fix that with our shade smooth. While we're in object mode, right click shade smooth all the way at the top, and super special note, we need to be in object mode to be able to perform this action. It's happening on the object level. Then for step number 2, we need to make our edge selection for our edge creases. I'll hit tab to jump into edit mode, I hit 2 to jump into edge selection mode, and then I'm going to go to my select menu and then select the very first option at the top. And then after you hit that, we should then see everything is then highlighted. Now before we apply our edge creases, we need to deselect 8 of the edges that are on the cylinder. Note that we want the edges, but we do not want the curved part. And what we do not want to do is, while we have everything selected, single click on this first edge to deselect it. This will make everything else become deactivated. We want to immediately shift click to deactivate the first edge and then continue on with the rest of the edges. And then shift select the 2nd, and then I'm going to go all the way around, shift selecting 2 on each side until we have a total of 8 deselected. Again, we want the ones on the sides, those are going to be creased, those are going to be hard, and the ones that we're deselecting are going to be smooth. Then once we have our selection, step number 3, we need to perform our edge crease. I'll go up to my edge menu, down in the middle, I'll select edge crease. Now this is a 2-step operation, so as soon as you click on this, don't click on anything after you do this. After you click on edge crease, you'll notice that in the top left of your viewport, there is a crease value. You want to move your mouse up without clicking on anything until you see the value start to rise, and keep going up until you see a value of 1. Then once you see that reach a value of 1, click anywhere on your 3D view to confirm that action. Now if you've done that in the 3D view, our edges should now look bright pinkish purplish. That is how we know our edges are creased. And after we see that, if we tab out to object mode so we can see our subdivision modifier, we can now see that it's keeping its shape around those edges. And super special note here, our cylinder is still round. That's the key point here. The cylinder's round, but the edges are creased. But something's wrong here. Something feels a bit weird, and we notice that there are some dents in the mesh. Overall, it doesn't feel quite right. So step number 4, we're going to fix this by adding another subdivision modifier without the edge crease to be able to smooth this. Currently, our edges are too sharp. So I'm going to go up to my add modifier, Then second column, fifth one to the bottom, we'll select our subdivision surface modifier. Then after I add that, to be able to make a bit more space to work, I'm going to collapse my mirror, collapse the first subdivision modifier. Then our default values that we're going to set here are going to be disabled visibility in edit mode. Then we're going to set the value to 1 and 1. Now we're setting this lower because we already are doing 3 different subdivision values, which is fairly high. We don't want to go much more than this. If your computer's starting to slow down, you can always go lower on that. So instead of setting them to 3, you can set them to 2. Now we still don't see much changed here, so what's happening here? So we need to go into under the advanced menu in the second modifier, and we're going to disable edge creases. And all of a sudden it starts to feel a lot better. So what's happening here? Now the first subdivision modifier, this is adding resolution and it's holding the edges and smoothing out the cylinder. Then the second subdivision modifier is ignoring those creases, allowing the mesh to then be smooth and have a rounded finish, which is what we want. Great, now as we orbit around, we should start to see the mesh starts to feel very nice, starts to feel a lot more hard surface. We shouldn't see any dents or anything. It should look all very smooth. And we'll continue in the next
So my opinion on that is the first one is sweeping the ring out, the creases are not affected, and then the second one affects the creases as well. So you've subdivided everything apart from the creases twice, and you've only subdivided the creases once. My opinion, could be wrong.
chapter. Our goal for these next few chapters is to model out the handle of
I think I'll actually stop there because we're moving on to something else, but hopefully I'll be able to bring myself to do it. I'm trying to do like an hour a day. It's not much, but I want to like do an hour, take a break, do an hour, take a break. Hopefully one day I'll be able to do 3 hours, who knows. But yeah, stopping here. Not much talking, probably boring as hell, but it's, you know, it's going to record everything, stick it on YouTube. Alright, that's it then.